Good morning, everyone. Yet again, I want to say it's a pleasure to see you out this morning. It's a pleasure to have our visitors with us. We invite you to come back at any opportunity that you may to come back and worship with us, especially with the weather out this morning. I'm sure there are plenty that would rather stay indoors, but I'm glad that you decided to come out and worship with us. If you would take out your Bibles, we're going to be continuing our study there in Esther chapter 2. Last time we came together, last time we came together, we started there in Esther chapter 1, and we took a look at two people there, and that's what Esther chapter 1 focused on. The king Ahasuerus. We focused on his pride, we focused on his love of sin and partying, and how that led to kind of his downfall and losing his wife. And we also looked at Queen Vashti, his wife, who refused to come out and dishonor herself before all the nobles of the court and everything else there. And she ended up being put away because in a fit of wrath and in a fit of foolishness, the king decided to listen to his advisors and say, we'll just put her away forever rather than settle this. We'll just put her away forever. And we left off beginning there in chapter 2, and that's where we're going to start. Esther chapter 2, beginning there in verse 1. After these things, after he's put away Vashti, after his wrath has subsided and everything's gone down, after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered his wife Vashti, what she had done and what he had decreed against her. The image I kind of get here in Esther chapter 2, beginning there, is we kind of get a picture of King Ahasuerus sulking here. After he's sobered up, after he's no longer as angry as he was, he kind of reflects back and realizes, what have I done? I've just put away my wife. I have made a decree that she is to be put away, and there is nothing I can do to undo this. She's gone forever. It's not I got into a fight with her and I'm going to spend a couple nights on the couch and maybe if we're lucky we can make up. I have made a decree that even the gods cannot change according to what they say. Even the gods cannot change. She's gone. And there's nothing I can do about it. So the servants attempt to give some advice and cheer him up. Beginning in verse 2, then the king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that he may gather together all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, and to the women's quarters under the custodians of Haggai the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparations be given to them. And let the young woman who pleases the king instead be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. So this kind of sets up the situation for how Esther comes into the picture and everything else that's going to precede this. Because of his sin, because of his anger, because of his pride and his foolishness, he puts away his previous wife. And in kind of attempt to cheer him up and try and fix everything, the servants go, quick, call every beautiful young virgin you can find, scour the kingdom for the best possible replacement that we can find, and let her come and be the queen instead of Vashti. Maybe this will fix everything. It'll look better for his image because now he's got a queen. It'll make him happier because now he's got a queen. Everything will just be put behind this and no one will have to remember or care about Vashti anymore. So now we get introduced to Esther. Esther's introduction reminds me a lot of Daniel. Daniel was there in the beginning of the book of Daniel. He's there in the beginning of captivity, where Nebuchadnezzar comes in. He conquers him, and Nebuchadnezzar commands that, well, let's go through and let's go through the best of the young people that we can find. Let's gather them together. Let's train them and let them be servants. Now we've kind of got a similar situation a couple generations down and a couple kingdoms down. Now we've got, well, let's gather the best of the people of my country, including the Israelites. Let's find the best of them, and let's, instead of making some to be nobles in my court, let's find the best woman that we can find and make her queen. Beginning there in Esther chapter 2, beginning there in verse 5. In Shushan the citadel there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father or mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So essentially, these are the great-grandchildren of the captives that were first taken away when Nebuchadnezzar captured Jerusalem and everybody there. Historically, Esther is likely alive at least through part of the end of Daniel's life. Maybe has even heard about Daniel. But we're still the great-grandchildren of captives. We're still captives in a foreign land. And now kind of what happened whenever we were first captured is happening again. The king's going through and he's picking out the best of the best and goes, "You're going to be my wife." Another thing to note here, I think I called her Mordecai's niece. I think I called Mordecai her uncle last lesson. Mordecai and Esther are cousins here. I made a mistake last lesson. So Mordecai goes, and we'll talk about more about him in just a few moments. Mordecai goes and recognizes that Esther doesn't have parents. They passed away. There's no one to raise her. So he takes her in and treats her like his own daughter. So Esther is taken along with all these other women, and it's decided that you're going to be one of the beautiful young virgins that we found, and you're going to throw in your candidacy, and you're going to be trained up for a period of time to see if you're going to be the one that's going to be the queen. So it was in verse 8, when the king's command decree was heard, and when the young men and women were gathered at Shushan the citadel under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, and to the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. I want you to think about this. What would your reaction be being thrown into this situation? You're essentially a captive of a foreign power. Not even the original foreign power that captured you. You've been passed off because that foreign power, Babylon, has fallen. And now we're in the Medo-Persian Empire. They just kind of inherited you as captives. And you're still being treated like a slave, and your life isn't really your own. And the king decides in a drunken rage to throw away his last wife and says, well, just gather any beautiful young virgin that you can find, bring her in here, and you got the unlucky straw that you got pulled into this too. Because the king couldn't keep a level head about himself. I imagine most people would be pretty angry, and they wouldn't be happy with the situation. Others might look at this as a great opportunity. Here it is, I can be queen of the whole country. I can get to be the best seat here. I can gain all these riches. I can have all this power. This is a great opportunity. Others, I imagine, might be scared. The king just threw away his last wife. What's going to happen to me? How is he going to treat me? There could be some harboring grudges here from Esther that, well, we were taken captive. I don't really have any love for this king or the people that are still holding us hostage away from our home back in Israel and back in Canaan. I don't really want to be here. But notice her attitude. Verse 9 beginning. Now the young woman pleased him, that is Hegai, the custodian, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave her beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided to her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Again, I'm getting more parallels here between Daniel and Esther. You're thrown into an odd situation. You're kidnapped against your will. You're told to come in here and do whatever is commanded of you. And where you or I might get angry, we might throw a fit, we might be afraid, we might just do the least we have to do to get by and survive. Esther, because of her faith, because of how she was raised, and her attitude, just like Daniel and his friends, gains favor in everyone that she comes across. Hegai, the chief here, who is probably taking care of thousands of women, who is having to oversee everyone, because remember, this kingdom is massive. It took 6 months for the king to do a tour and party in every major city there was and brag about his entire kingdom. That same kingdom, they had to go out and scour every beautiful maiden that they could find and bring them in here. So Haggai's got a lot of responsibility and a lot of people to take care of, and still Esther stands out. Not because of her beauty, but because of her attitude. So he rewards her. He gives her extra attention. He gives her extra preparations. He brings multiple other servants and brings them under her care and makes sure that she is taken care of. Because she's got an attitude that is different from everyone else we've come across. Verse 10 and 11, really verse 9 down through verse 10 and 11, we'll get more into in a later lesson. But there in verse 9, as he's done all these preparations, beginning there in verse 10, it says, Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the house of the women's quarter to learn Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. So in part of this whole preparation process and in part of everything getting ready, Esther doesn't reveal that she's an Israelite. That'll come into play in later chapters, but that's just something we need to take note of. Continuing on down in verse 12, again we see more insight into her character. Each young woman's turn came to go into King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months of preparation, according to the regulation for the women. And thus were the days of preparation accordingly. 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Thus prepared each young woman, and they went into the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters into the king's palace. In the evening she went in the morning, and she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shazgaz, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. She would not go into the king unless the king delighted in her and called again for her by name. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but Haggai, the king's eunuch, what the custodian of the women advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. Again, you're in her situation. And you have had the last 12 months at the least. That's the amount of time it took for the beauty preparations. And then you're still waiting on your turn for the king to call you. You have spent the better part of a year or more being waited on hand and foot. What is your attitude probably going to be when you were told to go in and take whatever you want? And what is your attitude going to be probably when you go into the king? Well, I am just the best thing to ever walk this earth, and everyone's going to do what I say. I am going to be the future queen, and everyone's going to do what I say, and I'm going to do what I want. That's probably quite a bit of the women's attitudes here. Esther's attitude, when it comes her turn, go in and pick out what you want. Dress yourself however you want when you're going to go into the king. She still is humble enough to say, what should I do? What is your advice? What should I do? Tell me and I'll do it. She has not let all the pomp and the pride and the beautification and everything else go to her head. She's still the same person she went in as when the decree came about. All virgins be gathered from every corner of the capital and be brought into the king to be prepared to possibly be the next queen. She didn't let everything get to her head and change her. Again, the author points out here, she gained favor in all she came across. She's still acting the way that she was raised. To be humble, to serve God, and to have the right attitude. So then, continuing on down in verse 16, Esther was taken to the king Ahasuerus into his royal palace. In the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the other virgins. So he set a royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, that is the feast of Esther, for all of his officials and his servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. You look here, beginning in verse 16, and it says, when he decides, he makes Esther his queen in the 7th year of his reign. Do you remember when he decided to start searching for all the virgins? 3rd year of his reign. So she's been in this whole process for 4 years. It's a long time of people waiting on you hand and foot, of the chief custodian and the eunuch giving you special attention above everybody else. A lot of lesser people would have caved in and completely changed who they were. Esther still stayed true to how she was raised. She did as Mordecai told her to keep her heritage secret. And all the while was gaining favor in front of everyone that she came across. So much so, it's even evident to the king. She's different from everyone else that gets brought in here over this 4-year period. She's to be my queen. We'll talk more about Esther in the next coming of lessons. Next person I want to get introduced to is Mordecai. 4 main people we are going to follow in the rest of this book. Ahasuerus, Esther, and Mordecai are 3 of them. We'll be introduced to the 4th person in the next lesson, that is Haman. But Mordecai is one of the other important and key people in this book. And he's the man who raised Esther. We already know his back verses in 5 through 7 that he and Esther are cousins. And when it showed up the situation that his cousin has no parents, no one to raise her because of a situation that we really don't know a whole lot about. Whatever the case is, she lost her parents. So he takes her in and raises her as his own daughter. So we already see that he has some care, that he has some compassion, and that he has some love for other people, especially his family. So we get some insight into his character there. We see some caution there on his character there in verse 10 and verse 11, where we already noticed that he told Esther, don't reveal your heritage. Don't show that you're a slave. Don't play whoever you are as some kind of bargaining chip, either positively or negatively. Just show who you are as a person, as a character, how you live your life, and let that speak for itself. Doesn't matter whether you came from some rich merchant and you're one of his daughters and something might be gained out of him marrying you, or you're someone that likely is a poor beggar, or someone that comes from nothing, or someone that comes from everything. It doesn't matter. Be who you're going to be. She does that, and she gains favor of everyone she comes across. We'll talk more about that in the coming lessons, why it was important she didn't reveal her heritage. That'll come into play later. Then, we get over to verse 19 and 20, and we've already kind of seen this hinted at the whole time. But towards the end of the lesson, while all of the beauty preparations and everything is going on with Esther, we get a little bit of kind of a side story here, or a side insight here, as to what Mordecai is doing while everything's going on. Picking up there in verse 19, when the virgins were gathered together a second time during the beauty preparations, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. So it sounds like he ruled his own household well and he was a good father. And it shows. My bet is that's the biggest problem with this country. The family is in pieces. And just about everybody that you come across. Most of the kids I went to school with in college are the people that I worked with. A good 90% of them at least were very jealous that I had both parents at home by the time I was in my teens and in my 20s, and still do. Most people don't have that. We get an insight here into who Mordecai is and how it shaped Esther and who she is and who she is going to become in this whole book, and why she is remembered so fondly, and why, although it is not mentioned directly, God probably chose to make her a queen. A lot of that has to do with Mordecai's influence in raising her to be who she was going to be. That when the temptation arises that you're being treated like a queen for 4 years, you're being prepared, you're picked out as the best among the women and the most likely candidate, that you still recognize who it is that you serve, who your God is, and you still stay faithful and you stay the same person. A lot of that influence came evidently from Mordecai. So he gets some credit here too on top of Esther. While all of this is going on, verse 21, in those days while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, he overhears a conversation. 2 of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So now, while he's sitting here in the king's gate and people are coming in and out, he's kind of in the center point of everything that's going on. He gets to overhear and see everything. He overhears a conversation between 2 of the king's servants. Something has gone on. They're angry. And now they're plotting to go in and let's assassinate the king. So what's he do about it? Verse 22 down through 23. So that when the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed. Both the men were hanged on the gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Again, more of this will come up later in other chapters. But we're still seeing the role that Mordecai is playing, in everything going on here. He hears something about the king is going to be killed. There are some servants that are plotting to kill the king. He gets the word somehow to Esther and lets her know, hey, Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of these doorkeepers, are planning to go and kill the king. She goes and informs the king. Again, probably gained her some favor as well. That here is one of my potential women that I already like. And she's coming and informing me about an assassination plot. That tells me I can trust her. Probably gained her some more favor. But Mordecai goes and lets it be known, and it's written down in the book that Mordecai is the one that informed all of this. And again, that'll come up later. So far, some of the lessons that I'm taking from Esther just in chapter 2 is that no matter what situation you or I are in, God can still be served. That no matter what situation may come in the future, our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren can still serve God. There's some concern, and it's valid, about what the future of this country is going to look like and what our future generations are going to have to put up with. And there's some concern about what their faith is going to look like. If you do what you're supposed to do now to raise up and to encourage the generations around you to stay faithful now, when future adversities come, more than likely they're still going to stay strong. Because here we are a couple generations down the line that evidently through Mordecai's family, the faith is still held strong from his great-grandparents down, that God is still the God who we need to serve, that this is how you need to live, this is how you're supposed to raise your family, and it's still strong in Esther and in him. So no matter what bad thing is going on in the world right now, you and I can still serve God. And if we're raising the generations after us to put the focus, first and foremost, on what His Word says, on who God is and how He can be served, that attitude will continue. It doesn't work if as fathers and as mothers and as brethren, we slack off on training the next generation. Because when Satan comes along and tries to lure them away and they've not been rooted and grounded in the truth, they will fall away. The best chance you and I have to give them is the same thing that I know some of us were blessed with, to have parents that were godly and raised us upright. And others were blessed because, no, maybe your parents didn't teach you, because that's not the background you came from. But you had other people that took an interest in your soul and became like spiritual parents to you. They taught you the truth and rooted you and grounded you in it. Maybe they're still alive, maybe they're long gone. Whatever the case is, God can still be served in this generation and in the next to come. But if the importance isn't stressed and put on His Word and what He says, they won't serve Him in the generations, more than likely, when it comes. Because raising godly-minded people pays off. I see Mordecai here as he's pacing outside the gates, as he's sitting in the king's gates, waiting for any bit of news for his cousin, who he feels is like a daughter to him. He's concerned about her. I kind of get the image of the parent who's waiting by the phone for their kid to call because they're off at college. They're finally off out on their own. Anything can happen, and anyone can be around them. I pray and I hope they do what's right. On a lesser scale, that's the kind of image I get with what Mordecai is going through. He's worried about his daughter. He's praying that she's all right, that she will stay faithful, that she will still keep doing her best to serve God no matter what comes her way. And there's no real way to get a hold of her right now, and there's no way of knowing what's going to happen with 100% certainty. But he's still waiting to see what will happen. Finally, we're going to see this throughout the rest of the book too, but we see it, I think, most plainly here in chapter 2. How we live our lives, what we do, and the attitude that we have is plainly evident to those around us. This is the same lesson that Jesus taught on the Sermon on the Mount. You're a light unto the world. You're a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Among the thousands of women that were likely gathered together to be potential mates for the king, Esther couldn't go unnoticed. Not because she threw a fit, not because she made herself stand out, but because she served and she lived in a godly way. Everyone that came in contact with her noticed it. The same thing needs to be said about us. That not just on Sunday morning when we're all gathered together, but on every day of the week when you and I are out and about, in public, at work, at home with our family, among our friends, whatever the case is, that we don't look like the rest of the world. That we don't sound like the rest of the world. That we're not living, looking like any other person walking the street in your average day center. That if you spend much time around you or around me, that it becomes evident to the person around us that there's something different about you. That you don't talk, you don't live, and you don't act like everyone else around you. You're happy. You're thankful. You're polite. You're loving. You're caring. Where does all this come from when it's so easy to become jaded by the rest of the world? And it comes up pretty quick when people start asking you those questions that you just got a great opportunity to talk about Christ and the Bible. Over and over I was thankful to my parents, although I didn't realize it as much at the time, when we'd go out in public and undeniably it came up. How are your kids so well behaved? They're quiet, they're not running around, they're not screaming, they're not acting up most of the time. Sometimes we misbehave. But you're different from every other family that comes into the dentist office that we have to come across. What are you doing? You just got an opportunity to talk about God's Word. As I mentioned before, you're in the hospital because Dad's got cancer. And your room is the only one on the entire floor that's constantly joking around and laughing and singing, and you're happy, and we're not used to people like you. What are you on, or what are you doing that is so different from everybody else? Because us and the people that we surrounded ourselves with tried our best to live as lights of the world. We can be like Esther. We can be like Mordecai. And it becomes very plain and evident. We're going to see it from Mordecai in the next couple of chapters, when he gets his own temptations and he stands for the truth. That Esther's not the only one here doing it. So be reminded and be strengthened that God can still be served this week. Make an effort to be more of a light to your community, to your family members, and to your friends, maybe than we have in the past. And if you want to become one and you're not one this morning, you have the opportunity to do that. The first step that you need to take is to become a Christian. That means that you've heard the gospel, that you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that you are ready and willing to confess Him as your Lord and Savior, to repent of your sins, and to be baptized this morning. If that is the case and you want to take care of that, please do not hesitate. You'll have the opportunity here in just a moment, when we get up and sing the invitation song, that you can come forward and we can make your life right with God, and you can start to be that light shining to your community. Today's the day to start doing it if you haven't already. But if not, you've not been living your life as you ought to, you have lost sight of what it means to be a servant of God, to be a light to your community, to stand for the truth when temptations come and the world and Satan is trying to pull you in every other direction but towards heaven, then you need to make a change. If you are a Christian and you recognize that you have slacked off and you are weakening and you need help, first and foremost, you need to pray to God and ask Him for forgiveness and ask Him for strength. And if it's something of a public nature that you have done that has brought shame upon the church, then you also need to correct that this morning by coming forward, confessing those things, and we will pray with you and pray for you and do whatever we can to help you. Whatever the case may be, if the need calls for it, please come forward now as together we stand and sing the song that has been selected.